Welcome to Chapter 21, where we talk about the lymphatic system and the immune system, which isn't actually a system, but it is a bunch of cells that have a similar function. So the lymphatic system is actually a system where we can talk about blood vessels and organs and things like that, except for they're not blood vessels, but they're like blood vessels. In the last chapter, we learned about arteries and veins and capillaries. We learned about the tunicas, the one on the outside, which is the adventitia or the externa, the one in the middle, which is usually muscular, the media, and then the inner one, which is the intima or interna, depending on who's writing the textbook. So we're going to have another set of the same vessels with the same makeup, but instead of carrying blood, they're just going to carry lymph. So last chapter we learned that at the end of capillaries, you have fluid leaking out, and then you have all the waste that are in the tissues that needs to be picked up, and all this fluid that leaks out of the capillaries that's carrying food and gases to all the tissues. Somehow or another, that's got to be picked back up and carried back to the heart. And most people don't realize that they have a whole nother system that does just that. So that fluid will go into the lymphatic system. It'll go into the capillaries of the lymphatic system, and that clear fluid with some debris and stuff that it's picked up, some waste, will be carried, and the capillaries come together to make veins, and then the veins come together to make trunks, and then they dump into the right side of the heart, and it blends in with all the blood, and it is carried where it needs to be destroyed, excreted, recycled, whatever you need to do with whatever the lymphatic system picked up. So most people are really surprised to find that they have a whole nother set of vessels that don't carry blood that runs throughout their body. Besides these vessels, the other structures that make up the lymphatic system is the red bone marrow and the thymus, the lymph nodes, the tonsils, and the spleen. Now, when you're a child, you have red bone marrow in most of your bones. But as you get older, slowly but surely, the red bone marrow is replaced by yellow bone marrow, which is fat. And that's nice if you're cooking soup and you're using bones from like a chicken, because you want that fat to come out. You want the marrow because it's got a rich, fatty flavor. Delicious. But unfortunately, as we get older, we have fewer bones that make blood for us, that have the red marrow that's necessary for making the immune cells also. The lymphatic system returns anywhere from 2 to 4 liters of fluid back to the circulatory system every day. So you can see it wouldn't take very long for you to really build up a lot of fluid outside of the blood vessels if something happened to block the lymphatic system for any reason. So it has a very important function of returning fluids, but even more important than that is it runs the lymph through nodes, and these nodes are full of white blood cells looking for anything that the lymphatic system has picked up that shouldn't be there. So cancer cells can be picked up by the lymphatic system, viruses, worms, all sorts of things. So the lymph nodes are a way station along the way to take this fluid back to the heart, and it cleanses, it takes out the things that shouldn't be there and destroys them. So we'll spend a little more time talking about that as we go along. Another thing that the lymphatic system does, it has specialized capillaries down in the small intestine, and the name of them is Lacteals. because when you look at them, they look like they're full of milk. And it's not milk, it is fat. So in order for your body to absorb fat from your intestines, it goes into these lacteals, and then it is returned to the heart and spread throughout the body to the places that need it. Now, a lot of people think, well, we don't need fats. We don't need lipids in our diet. In fact, if we could just cut fats and lipids out of our diet, we would be skinny. And if you were able to cut fats and lipids out of your diet, you'd be dead. So you need them to repair cells. You need them for all sorts of things. You need them to make hormones. So too much fat, obviously, is not a good idea. So I have to tell you a funny story. It's one of my favorite. There was a company, Lay's potato chip is one of them, Doritos, part of it. And they read about stuff like this, and they read about the Lacteals, and they said, oh, well, if we could make a fat that was so large it couldn't be absorbed by the Lacteals, then you could have that delicious greasy flavor that we all know and love with our chips, but you would get no calories. They would be fat-free, even though they were covered with fat, because the fat was so large it couldn't be absorbed by the Lacteals. And they named this fat Olean. And I was so excited when it came out. And the name of the packages, they were made with that particular fat, so they were fat-free chips, fat-free Doritos, was called Wow. And I don't know what that stood for. But anyway, I was all about it. I was in the grocery store and buying all these Wow potato chips and things like that. And then I'm one of those people that reads everything. You know, I sit and read the package inserts, and I read the back of the cereal boxes and things like that. And so the thing that I think is absolutely amazing was on the packages, they had to put a warning, and it said, may cause greasy anal leakage. So if you stop and think about it, your mouth all the way through to your anus is just a tube. And if you eat greasy food and it's not absorbed, then all of that fat lines your intestines. And so when you eat food, it hits the greased intestines and goes sliding right through. So not only did people have diarrhea and surprisingly fast bowel movements, but also the fat literally would drip out of the anus and into their underwear. So I don't think you'll be seeing anything made with Olean in the future. Another name for it was Olestra, and there were other labels, but my favorite was the greasy anal leakage. So this slide is talking about the lymphatic organs, which like the spleen and thymus, that are separated from surrounding organs by connective tissue capsules. Just like blood capillaries, you've got them everywhere except for your cartilage, the cornea of your eye, in your bones, and your bone marrow. And the capillaries are a little bit different than the ones that make up the blood system. In the blood system, you need to keep the blood inside the capillaries. So you're going to have a little bit of tissue on the outside of your squamous epithelial cells. But in the case of the lymphatic capillaries, their main function is to allow that fluid back inside. So their cells are like roof shingles. So they overlap, and instead of having that connective tissue on the outside, they actually have a little bit of filaments that hold them to surrounding tissues. So they're much more leaky, they're much more open, and it's easy for the fluid to just push in between the roof shingles. the gaps in between the cells are large enough to allow bacteria and actually even cells to get into the lymphatic system. So we're going to find that some immune systems jump into the lymphatic system and are carried. And unfortunately, if you have a cancer, sometimes some of the cancer cells break off or metastasize. So if a cancer stays put in one place, you can just kill it with radiation or cut it out. But if it breaks off and starts moving through the circulatory system or the lymphatic system, then unfortunately, that's how it spreads to various places in your body. So the lymph nodes hopefully will catch any cancerous cells before they start dividing and set up a colony somewhere else, or a tumor somewhere else in your body. This figure should look familiar from the last chapter, where we see the arteriole and we see the venule. Here's the metarteriole, and there are the capillaries around it. But now they've added these green structures, and these green structures are the lymphatic capillaries. So these are the ones that are going to be absorbing the fluid that leaks out of these capillaries and returns it back to the heart. Here is an artist's representation of these cells. So here's your flat cell, there's the nucleus right there. And then instead of being attached to each other, they're attached to nearby cells. So here are nearby cells, and there's an anchoring filament, there's an anchoring filament that holds them together. And then there's the flaps where they overlap, so fluid can come in. And the same thing that pumps the heart, you know, the vessels that come away from the heart and back to the heart, are the same things, except there's no heart pumping to get this. So the blood goes out of the heart, through the body, and back to the heart. In the case of the lymphatic system, they only go back to the heart. That's it. They're one direction, just to the heart. So when you walk and your skeletal muscles contract, that's going to push fluid into these lymphatic capillaries. When you breathe, you have the thoracic component that pushes the fluid into the lymphatic vessels. So everything that was true for the circulatory system is true for the lymphatic system, with the exception of you don't have the heart pumping to push the fluid. It's only coming in and going up to the heart. So some is draining out of the head down into the heart, but the rest of it is having to come up from your feet, up your legs, through the trunk of your body, up your arms. So it helps if you are experiencing swelling or fluid retention, to elevate your feet or lay down at night. The fluid has a chance to go more easily to the heart. As I mentioned, there's the three tunicas, just like there are in the circulatory system. And the difference is the lymph nodes and the fact that they go only into larger and larger vessels. They don't branch off like the circulatory system does, and they only go to the heart. The larger vessels have valves, just like we saw in the circulatory system. So here's some of the valves right here in a cartoon form, but then if you look up here, this is an actual picture right here. Now it's a little bit misleading because they put some red dye on it so that you could see it, because lymph is colorless. But when they dyed it red, you're like, oh, that's blood. Well, no, it's not blood. That's just some particulate stuff that's being carried through the lymph. So that's an unfortunate choice of colors. Just like the green is kind of an unfortunate choice of colors here, because it kind of makes you think that it looks like green beans or something. I'm not going to test you over the names of the trunks, but there's 11 of them. There's 2 jugulars, 2 subclavians, how about that name? Bronchomediastinal, intercostal, lumbar, and then there's one that comes from the intestines. So this is the only one that's unpaired. So that's why you have 11 trunks instead of 12. And then all of those pour into 2 collecting ducts. And so you have a right lymphatic duct, which receives lymph from your right arm, the right side of your head, your thorax, and empties into the right subclavian vein. The thoracic duct is larger and longer and begins in a sac in the abdomen called the cisterna chyli and receives lymph from below the diaphragm, from the left arm, the left side of the head, the neck, and the thorax, and empties into the left subclavian vein. And then that's it. So it's fairly simple as far as the lymphatic system goes. This slide has 2 pictures on it. One of them shows you, here's the circulatory system with blue and red, and then there's the lymphatic, which is coming only up this way and only down this way, whichever way you have to go to get to the heart, so you can dump back into the heart. And then these little things that look like little green beans scattered around, those are the lymph nodes. So here is a picture of a guy with lymph nodes. Here are some on the neck, up there, some around the breast area. You have axillary or under your armpit lymph nodes. You have inguinal lymph nodes where your trunk of your body and your legs join. So when you go to the doctor, if you have a good doctor who does a real physical exam on you, they will start feeling up on your neck, and they'll start around behind your ears, and then they'll come on down and they'll feel along your jawline, and then they'll come on down and they should feel in your armpits and on your chest, and then they'll reach down in between your legs and feel for these lymph nodes in your inguinal region. So they're not getting personal, they're actually, and a lot of times they'll close their eyes because they want to feel if they feel enlarged. And they usually do both hands because you may have a swollen lymph node on one side and you don't have on the other side. So they can tell what they're feeling, their palpations of whether or not one of them is enlarged or bigger than the other one. And this is good because this would indicate that there is an infection nearby, because the infection will be picked up and sent to the nearest lymph node. So if you happen to have some swollen lymph nodes here, you might have a venereal disease. So that's what the doctor's doing when they're feeling. And you can feel your own lymph nodes too. If you ever had mumps, and nowadays everybody's had the shot, but old people like me, we had to go through the mumps, it looked like we were chipmunks because it infects the lymph glands up underneath your jawline. And so you have this huge, swollen out, painful area from the mumps. And one of the things about the mumps, and I'm glad that they're giving people the vaccination instead of having to have the disease, is it could, they call it drop. They said it would drop down and cause a boy to become sterile. So they always wanted a kid to get mumps before they went through puberty so they wouldn't end up sterile. So people would have mumps parties to make sure that their kids got mumps before they went through puberty. So it didn't drop, it just made its way through the circulatory system and ended up in a lymph node down near the testicles. If a woman gets breast cancer, it will spread usually to these lymph nodes and then in the axillary lymph nodes. And so they stage the severity of breast cancer by how many lymph nodes are involved. How far has the cancer metastasized out of the breast, and how many of those lymph nodes have been infected. And a lot of times when they're removing the breast or the doing a lumpectomy or mastectomy, where they remove just part of the breast or all the breast, they'll also be removing these lymphatic nodes to see how many of those have cancer in them. And they may have to go back and remove some more if it's spread farther than that. Once it's made it to your liver and your bones, then it's probably too late. And they tell you that you now have terminal cancer because it's spread too far for the lymph nodes to be able to handle. Two important things on this slide. The valves prevent backflow, so it won't flow back down into your ankles or flow back down into your body. And exercise significantly increases lymphatic return. So the more you exercise, the prettier your ankles will be. On the first slide, it said that you have approximately 10 times the number of bacteria in and on your body than you do have cells. Now, of course, this varies if you haven't taken a bath recently or if you haven't had a bowel movement, because the bulk of your feces is actually bacteria also. So we seem to think that bacteria are bad, and actually bacteria are quite helpful to us, most of them. There are, of course, bad actors, and we have to take care of those. So the lymphatic system and the immune system are there to take care of the bacteria that shouldn't be there or that are not helping us. There was a medicine that they had for acne. It was called hexachlorophene, and it was wonderful for wiping out bacteria on your face. So if you had acne on your shoulders or your back or your face, then they would prescribe it for you. It was called, the trade name, I think it was Physoderm. And unfortunately, some nurses thought, well, this will be great. We'll take these newborn babies and we'll wash them with this antibacterial soap so that they're really good and clean and they don't have any bacteria on them, because, you know, they just came through the mother's vaginal canal, and, you know, there's all kind of stuff in the vaginal canal, E. coli bacteria and yeast and things like that, and they ended up killing the children, the babies. So now you can't get it. Possibly, you might be able to get it with a prescription still, but I've not seen anybody or heard of anybody who was able to get hold of it in a very long time, because we need bacteria. So if you just wanted to kill the acne on your face, that's one thing. But if you wanted to use it long term or over too much of your body, then it could cause you some problems. So it's always important to use medicine as directed. So neutrophils are, we talked about the 5 kinds of white blood cells, and neutrophils are one of them. They're also known as polymorphonuclear leukocytes, or PMNs, and they're the ones that have the nucleus. It's got all kinds of bulging lobes on it. So they're unmistakable when you see them under the microscope. But their claim to fame is that they love to kill bacteria. The problem, once a neutrophil has gone into battle and it's going to kill whatever it is that is running into, like bacteria, it ends up giving up its own life as it does it. It's kind of like a kamikaze, where it's like a suicide bomber, I guess, in that it goes in and it starts eating all of the things that it can, but then it's also secreting chemicals that are killing things that it can't reach and can't eat. But while it kills the nearby cells, nearby bacteria, worms, whatever it is that it's attacking, it also kills the neutrophils themselves. Natural killer cells are really large lymphocytes that also eat bacteria, but they also will attack transplanted tissue. So if you have a kidney transplant or a lung transplant, they're going to have to give you something that's going to block the natural killer cells. Otherwise, they will destroy the tissue because it's not you. And it knows it's not you. It recognizes things that are you or self. They call it self. And it will kill any cell that's been infected with viruses or any cells that have turned cancerous. So natural killer cells are wonderful things to have. The T lymphocytes, they say mature in the thymus. Both B and T lymphocytes are made in the bone marrow, but then they have to go somewhere to learn how to be a T lymphocyte or how to be a B lymphocyte. And they did the original studies in chickens, and they named them T lymphocytes because they mature in the thymus, and B lymphocytes because they mature in the bursa of chickens. Well, we have a couple of problems there. Humans have B lymphocytes, but we don't have a bursa because we're not chickens. So they're trying to figure out where they mature, and they've about decided that they just mature in the bone marrow. They're made in the bone marrow, and they mature there, and they learn how to be B lymphocytes, the whole thing in the bone marrow. And the T lymphocytes supposedly leave the bone marrow. They're born in the bone marrow, and then they go through the circulatory system and end up in the thymus, where they learn how to do T lymphocyte functions. We'll talk about those in a second. The problem that we have with this is the older you get, you don't have a thymus. So someone my age, I don't have a thymus. But I do have an immune system, and I do have T lymphocytes. So there's a little bit of a problem there, but your book says T lymphocytes mature in the thymus, and we'll go with that. Another of the 5 kinds of cells that make up the white blood cell population are the monocytes. And they just run around like mild-mannered things that are really hard to tell from lymphocytes. But if they are exposed to pathogens, they grow and become very large and become macrophages. So anytime I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking about David Banner, who's just a mild-mannered guy in a laboratory, but if you make him mad, he turns into the Hulk. And that's kind of what monocytes do. They're little, and then they become macrophages, and they go around eating tissue that's broken down, excuse me, neutrophils, bacteria, all kinds of things like that. But they also have another thing that we're going to talk more about, which I think is super cool, is they take whatever it is that they have killed, whatever they have digested or fragmented, and they stick it up through their cell membrane and kind of wear it like a trophy on the outside. And so that's going to be really important when we get into talking more about the immune system and the humoral immune. So they process foreign matter and display the antigenic fragments out on the cell membrane to alert the T cells. So the T cells are going to be the soldiers in this fight, and they're considered to be antigen-presenting cells. So as you're running along reading your book and you keep running into APCs, it's like, what the heck is an APC? Well, it's an antigen-presenting cell. So the macrophages are not the only ones that know how to do it, but they're one of the largest groups that are antigen-presenting cells. Here's an actual picture showing you an antigenic-presenting cell. This is the macrophage, and these are bacteria. And what these things do, what the white blood cell does, the macrophage does, is it sends out fake feet, or pseudopods. So this thing can use the pseudopods to crawl around. So if there were some bacteria over here, it would just crawl over there and eat them. And what looks like the bacteria attacking this thing is not so, because this will reach out with its pseudopods, grab a hold of a bacteria, and pull it inside and digest it. So it's got all kinds of digestive enzymes nearby, inside. And again, it also has the ability to present bits and pieces of these bacteria or these viruses or whatever it is that it's attacking. In this case, it's just bacteria because viruses would be too small to see. But it presents them on the outside of its cell. So again, I think that's the coolest thing. It's like I'm wearing my enemy. The dendritic cells are kind of neat. If you look down in through your skin, you know that when you did the integumentary system, you learned about your dermis, your epidermis on top of it, dermis, hypodermis, stuff like that. Hopefully you remember all that stuff. Well, as you're looking down where the epidermis and dermis meet, you've got these dendritic cells, and dendritic means tree-like. So it's got extensions sticking out. And you have them in your skin, you have them in your mucous membranes, and in your lymphatic organs. What they do is if they touch something that shouldn't be there, then they sound a signal. So I'm trying to think of an analogy that would be, but all I can think of is like a spy with his ear to every door and listening. So they can cover a large area considering how tiny they are because they're branched out like that. But if they find something that has invaded you, like you've been stung by a bee, or you stuck a thorn in your finger, or you were cutting a bagel and you sliced your finger, it's the dendritic cells are going to be able to move and go over and tell the lymph nodes, hey, there's something going on over here. So they are branched, they are mobile, and they are antigen-presenting cells. So again, these have the ability to take something, break it down, and stick the fragments up through its cell membrane to show what it's killed. Reticular cells, these are stationary. They don't crawl around, but they are also branched, and they do kind of the same thing as the dendritic cells. The difference being that the dendritic cells they're mobile. They can go crawl somewhere and recruit other white blood cells to the cause. Lymphocytes are considered to be lymphoid tissue, but it's not a tissue like you're familiar with, like your skin or the other things that are solid. This is a diffuse, scattered bunch of cells. And you're going to find lymphocytes wherever you have any opening to the outside. So you're going to have them in your nose, around your eyes, around your anus, and around your mouth, in your intestines. So anything that has a body passage that leads to the exterior, you're going to be finding these things. So you're going to find them in any mucous membranes that you've got. And one of the things that I'm sorry to see go is one of the things, if you're looking through the intestines, you would see a little patch of white blood cells, and they now call them mucosa-associated lymphatic tissue, or MALT. But they used to be called Peyer patches, P-E-Y-E-R, Peyer patches. So you'll probably hear me talking about Peyer patches because that's the way I've always called it. So here's a picture, and all of these little guys are lymphocytes. This is a lymphatic nodule, formerly known as a Peyer patch. And here's the villus. These are the things that secrete mucus. And this is the lumen of the intestines where the feces is going along. So as the stuff is going along, there are some bacteria that we like. I mean, E. coli gets a bad rap, but actually it's very, very helpful. It's just some bad actors that are mutated forms of E. coli that can actually cause problems for us. So any bad actors can be taken care of with the Peyer's patches or the MALT tissue lymphatic nodules in the intestines. The organs themselves, so we talked about tissue. That's just the widespread lymphatic cells throughout the body. But the lymphatic organs are actually things that you can, cut out or look at. They actually are solid. So lymph nodes would be one of those. Tonsils is another, and the spleen. And you have three kinds of tonsils, but the ones that we call tonsils, if you were looking in your throat and said, whoa, your tonsils are swollen, they're talking about your palatine tonsils. But you do have the adenoids, which are another kind, and then the ones on the side of your tongue, the lingual. All right, and the spleen, it does a lot of things. It can, if you need it to, it can make red blood cells for you. It can break down old dead red blood cells you don't need anymore. So it has a number of functions, but it also helps get rid of things that the immune system has found that are deemed not to be beneficial to you. So I was saying that kids have red bone marrow pretty much in all of their bones, but old people pretty much just have them in their flat bones. So you have them in your skull, and you have them in your scapula, which are flat, and your hip bones, which are also flat, and your sternum. So if they wanted to get a bone marrow sample from you, they'd probably go into your hip bone to pull bone marrow out. But it wouldn't do any good for them to go in your femur because it's already turned to yellow marrow and it's just fatty tissue now. The thymus is counted by several different systems, the lymphatic system, the immune system, and the endocrine system, because it makes a lot of hormones for us. There are developing lymphocytes there. So the T lymphocytes are the ones that grow up and mature in the thymus. And it's bilobed. It is between your sternum and your aortic arch, which I think is odd because most people are like, I don't even know where that is. Well, you know where your sternum is, and you know where your aortic arch is coming out of your heart, but you may not know because you've not cut into a human being. You've not done taken a gross anatomy class, so you don't really know. But again, like we were talking before about kidneys and the adrenal glands that sit on top of the kidneys, it looks like somebody just took a piece of chewing gum and parked it on top of the kidneys. And so that would be your adrenals sitting on top of your kidneys. Well, it looks like the same person went along and took some chewing gum and stuck a couple of wads of it over the heart, above the heart. So think about that the aortic arch comes out above the heart and then descends back down. So if it's going to be between the sternum and the aortic arch, it has to be there on top of the heart. Now, if you see the thymus of a baby, it's gargantuan. And then if you go down and you look at the thymus of just a mature adult, like most of you are, then it's still big, but nowhere near the size it was in a baby. In a baby, it's almost bigger than the heart itself. So it's huge. And then again, when you get to my age, it degenerates or involution with age. So they talk about the fibrous capsule on the outside. They've talked about inside you have the medulla. So the outer side is called the cortex, and cortex comes from the root word like meaning cork. So the bark of a tree on some trees is called cork. Like you make cork boards out of cork. So the outer part is the cortex, and the medulla is the middle. And so they go in and they talk about, where the little white blood cells are, the T lymphocytes are maturing, and stuff like that, which you guys don't have to know. By the way, if you find this stuff fascinating like I do, there's a whole semester course called immunology. And that's what they study, the lymphatic system and the immune system. So I highly recommend that course. So this is an actual picture of a slice through someone's thymus. And you can see the medulla here. All of this is medulla in the middle. And then you can see the cortex out here. So it stains darker. If you were to take a lymph node and cut it open and look at it under an electron microscope, this is what you would see. Each of these little things is a lymphocyte, a white blood cell, hanging out, waiting for something to happen. So the lymph is going to go through here, it's going to go through and around, and if a white blood cell detects something that should not be there, it is activated. So one of the functions of the lymph node is to allow the B and T cells to activate. So before that, they learned how to be B and T cells, but they hadn't been put to the task. So they've been taught how to use all of their weapons, but they didn't have anybody to fight. So now they've got somebody to fight, and they're going to go in and make the humoral immune system work. So we'll go over that in just a second. But I wanted you to see what the inside of a lymph node looks like, because I think it's kind of neat. Here's another picture through the side. So there you have the outer covering. You have a fibrous outer covering, and there are the little white blood cells hanging out in these little chambers. So these are called trabecula, which interestingly enough, you could probably remember because Alex Trebek is such a big guy, you know, in Jeopardy, and we just lost him. So trabecula. The name for an infected or an inflamed lymph node is a bubo, B-U-B-O, and the way you can remember that is bubonic plague. The people who have bubonic plague have enlarged lymph nodes, and they turn colors, and they darken. So here's someone who must have some infection of some sort, possibly testicular cancer, probably a venereal disease. But anyway, here's the enlarged lymph node, and then there's the penis and the testicles. So a bubo. Here's a picture of a lymph node that has HIV. It has the AIDS virus growing in it. So they have a special stain that they've stained the HIV. So this is an electron micrograph picture. If you tried to look at this through the regular microscope, you wouldn't be able to see that because viruses are really, really small. Here's another picture. I said that the monocytes became enlarged and became called macrophages. So all the white blood cells are basically about the same size, but here is the macrophage compared with the lymphocytes. So this has found something to destroy. It has fragmented it inside, taken it inside, pulled it into pieces, and stuck bits and pieces of it out in its cell membrane. And here are the lymphocytes coming to see what the foreign invader looks like. So it's like, here, look and see what I've got. And they're all like, what? Let me see, let me see, let me see. And so what's interesting is each of these lymphocytes is going to go away with a different picture of whatever the invader was. Because remember, the macrophage breaks it into pieces. So the analogy I use for this is like an elephant. If you ever have heard the saying of that a blind man, a bunch of blind people were feeling an elephant. And so one of the blind people had the nose and said, oh, well, an elephant has this long hose. So an elephant shaped like a hose. And someone else was feeling a leg, and they said, no, it's shaped, it's like a tree trunk. It's different. And then the one that got a hold of the tail says, no, it's got these fibers, and it swings back and forth. And another felt the ears and said, no, it's this big flat thing that swings back and forth. So depending on which part you grab a hold of, you're going to have different definition or different structure in mind. So each of these lymphocytes, if you take a virus and you tear it apart, you may have a piece of the outer coat that one of them finds on the surface of the macrophage. Another one may find some of those spikes that stick out. Some others may find some of that DNA or some of the enzymes that were inside the virus. So each one leaves with a slightly different picture of what this foreign invader looks like. So you're going to make antibodies against all the different parts of an invading organism. Now, in the case of like the COVID virus, everyone's getting just the messenger RNA for some of the spike protein. And so all the antibodies that you're going to make will be against just that spike protein. So you won't have any antibodies against the RNA that's inside the virus or any of the other parts of the virus. So if you catch a disease, you're going to have more and different and varied antibodies than you are if you have a vaccination. So anyway, this had a couple of things that, like they say, a picture tells 1,000 words. So there you go. Other things that you're going to find inside the lymph node are reticular fibers and reticular cells. So we talked about the reticular cells earlier. You have approximately 450 lymph nodes, give or take a few. And they cleanse the lymph, so the lymph has to flow through them, and that's where the B and T cells, they don't mature, they're already mature, but they're activated, and they're given a specific enemy to go and attack. If you haven't learned the word afferent and efferent, now is a really good time to learn that, because you're going to have to know that when we do the kidneys. So afferent is coming in. So here are vessels coming into this lymph node. Here's one, there's one, there's one, there's one, there's one. So you see there are several afferent lymphatic vessels. But coming out, there's only one or two or at most three. So all of these are coming in and bringing lymph, but only one or two are letting it leave. So what happens is you kind of have a bottleneck here. And so the lymph has to spend some time in here. It's kind of like if you're out on the road. That's the one I always come up with. You're out on a 3 or 4 lane highway and you're just driving along, and all of a sudden you're creeping and you're going nowhere. And then you finally, 15, 20 minutes later, you get up and you find out they're doing road construction. They've closed 3 lanes and all the traffic has to go just through 1 lane. So you know how slow it is. So while it's aggravating, it's nice to get the road fixed. And in the case of a lymph node, it's nice because the white blood cells have a chance to detect things that are in the lymph that might be harmful to you. So this is actually a nice thing, even though it makes you really, really irritated when you have to slow down in traffic. This is an actual autopsy picture where they've cut someone open and they're showing you, like, here's the femoral vein right there. And then these little bean-looking things over here, here's one and there's one, those are the inguinal lymph nodes. So here's a picture of someone doing an autopsy, and they've cut in and they're removing a lymph node right there. Our next lymph organ that we're going to talk about are the tonsils. So again, we're talking about the pharyngeal tonsils, the palatine tonsils. That's the ones that are what most people call the tonsils. And if you say, oh, I have tonsillitis, that's the ones that they're talking about. And sometimes they can swell so much that they'll close off your throat. And they have deep pits in them. So they call them tonsillar crypts. And the reason that that's kind of fun is because you a lot of times will get food stuck in there, and it makes these little waxy rocks. So you can look up tonsil stones or tonsil rocks, or sometimes if you just look in your mouth, you'll see them, little white things, and you can pop them out because they're just stuck down in the crypts. So here's a picture of someone with stuff, food, deposits stuck down in their crypts. So you can see them. And they're a lot of times they're smelly because, you know, food that's been around for a while is a little bit stinky. So, but you can just pop these out, be in their little hard things. Here's a uvula in the back of your throat right there. And so you can see how easy it would be for your tonsils to swell up and close off your throat. Used to, everybody just took their tonsils out. It was just a thing that you did. And if you ever had to read the book Cheaper by the Dozen, that's one of the things that the doctor just came to the house and they just lay you down on the kitchen table. They reach in, take out your tonsils, and go to the next kid. So they took the tonsils out of all of the dozen children in the book Cheaper by the Dozen. And then they realized, well, wait a minute, it actually is an immune thing and it's helping us. And so then they stopped taking them out, and they wouldn't take them out no matter what. And then come to find out, if you keep having repeated sore throats over and over and over, especially strep throat, over and over and over, sometimes the bacteria will actually colonize the tonsils. And at that point in time, you really need to remove the tonsils once they've been overwhelmed. So I had mine out when I was 16, and they said it looked like they were full of cottage cheese. So I think that was really gross. But I missed a lot of school because I had chronic tonsillitis. Okay. So this slide tells you about the lingual tonsils at the back of your tongue, and then the pharyngeal tonsil, which we normally call your adenoids. If they go in and take out your tonsils, they almost always take out your adenoids. And if your adenoid gets swollen, you're so swollen up. The largest of the lymphatic organs is the spleen. And you got red pulp, where you got red blood cells, and you have white pulp, where you have white blood cells. How about that? And you have a splenic artery. Now, one of the things they used to do if somebody was in a car wreck, they would say, well, they're going to be all right. They rushed them into surgery and they took their spleen out. And you're like, what? Why would they remove their spleen? The artery is so large and it's so hard to shut it off that it's usually easier just to cut the spleen out than it is to try to stop the bleeding from the artery. Now, according to your book, they've stopped just automatically taking the spleen out anytime you have abdominal damage. So that's good because you need it for your lymphatic system and your immune system. Here the slide says your spleen is highly vascular and vulnerable to trauma and infection. A ruptured spleen requires a splenectomy, but this leaves the person susceptible to future infections and premature death. Here are a few pictures. Here's an autopsy picture showing your spleen. So to kind of figure out where it is, look at your diaphragm. So this is the thing that your lungs ride up and down on. And there's your spleen right there. There's that artery, that pesky artery that ruptures if you're in a car wreck. And then if you notice, here are your kidneys. So kidney, spleen, diaphragm, to kind of put things into the area perspective. And here's your aorta. So we saw it come out of the heart, loop over, come down, and here it is coming down. And then it's going to branch off into the iliac arteries. So it's going down to your hips, right there. All right, and then this is if you did a cross section through, you can see the white pulp and you can see the red pulp. Literally, red from red blood cells, white from white blood cells.